Hey guys, welcome to my Sparkle guide. This will most likely be the most in-depth video on my entire channel as there's quite a lot I want to cover within it, from her best Lightcones and relics to even some niche stuff, like a pretty basic speed tuning guide for Sparkle. I don't feel the need to drag out this intro any longer though, so let's get straight into it. As usual, I want to quickly brush over her kit, to make sure everyone is up to date. Sparkle is a 5-star Quantum Harmony character who plays around her action advance, major buffs and skill point generation. Her skill advances forward an ally whilst providing them with a crit damage buff that is based off Sparkle's own crit damage. This number can get fairly insane fairly easily, as the scaling is very high, being double Bronya's own crit scaling. As a baseline, Sparkle with her Lightcone and no other crit damage subs of her own, starts off with a 84 crit damage buff. With a decent build, you'll be able to share even more damage, and here's a chart of what that looks like. Sparkle's skill is the most important thing in her kit as it's where her biggest buff comes from, but her talent and ultimate are fairly strong in their own sense too. Her talent buffs ally damage based on skill points consumed, and her ultimate empowers this effect for 2 turns. However, there is a really game-changing tech you can do to give her 100% uptime at E0. If you hold Sparkle's ultimate until your DPS turn starts, it does not tick down for that turn in particular, allowing you to have the full 48% damage bonus at all times. This is more than a damage orb worth of buffs on its own, and this is just a secondary buff on top of Sparkle's other stuff. Her ultimate also restores 4 skill points to allies, and she can go over the limit of 5 skill points with her talent, going to 7 instead. Her traces are also fairly basic but very powerful. Her first trace increases all allies' attack by 15%, and if there are 1, 2 or 3 quantum characters in the team, Sparkle grants them up to 25% attack. Her second trace extends the duration of her skill buff to last till the start of the skill's target's next turn. This is massive for Sparkle's versatility as it allows her to do things that Bronya cannot, such as buffing Lightning Lord for example. Her final trace gives her 10 extra energy whenever she basic attacks. This is more of a safety net, allowing you to weave in a basic attack whenever you need to without it ruining your energy rotation. Now that we're done talking about that, I want to discuss Sparkle's synergies, and that's fairly simple to say. It's pretty much everyone. Any crit scaling DPS in the entire game benefits heavily from Sparkle, and due to the nature of how her buffs work, you can actually play her with any crit scaling DPS due to her trace allowing her to work with characters that even attack outside their turn. But obviously there are some characters that benefit from Sparkle more than others. Dan Heng and Jing Yuan come to mind immediately, and the other quantum DPS characters. But I can't list them all, or it ends up looking something like this. Now that I'm done talking about Sparkle herself, let's get started on how to build her properly, but first I want to talk about her action advance. If you noticed before, her action advance is not 100% like, for example, Bronya's action advance. This means you have to work a little harder to get it to function similarly. Most people think a 50% advance just halves the current action value of the DPS. However, an action advance subtracts from the current action value by 50% of the base amount instead of having the current AV. A 50% action advance will essentially always cut your deep's action value to 0, resulting in them being placed right behind your Sparkle. As assuming you follow the criteria, your DPS will always have under 5,000 gauge by Sparkle's turn. If that made absolutely no sense, then I don't blame you. All you really need to take away from this is the criteria, which is that Sparkle is not 2 times the speed of your DPS or slower than your DPS in general. The general consensus of building speed on her is to build as much speed as you possibly can, with 160 being a good goal for most. When playing fast Sparkle, DPS speed is irrelevant. This is because you're basically dragging your DPS along with you with fast Sparkle, meaning that speed does not influence the amount of actions they take at all. Therefore you want 0 speed if possible, as you aren't gaining anything by having it. However, this is only one of 2 ways to speed tune Sparkle. If you can't or just don't want to play fast Sparkle, you can do the normal -1 variant, generally with 134 and 135 speed. It has its benefits, but it's overall just kinda worse, comparing to a 160 speed Sparkle. -1 grants 15% more actions, but you consume 50% more skill points. Use speed boots on your DPS, which means you lose 43% attack and you don't have 100% uptime on Sparkle's skill. It's completely up to you on which variant you want to use, as both are fine, as there are niche cases where -1 Sparkle can be better than fast Sparkle, mostly in situations like zero cycling, where the bonus action comes into play. But generally faster Sparkle is much better. Now that we are done with that, we can move on to the more guide-like part of the video. Starting with her talent priority, it's fairly simple. You want to max her skill first, then her ultimate, and then finally her talent last. However, her talent scaling isn't really that crazy outside her skill, so you can do something like level 8 on both her ultimate and talent without losing that much. Make sure to max out her skill though. Next I want to talk about Sparkle's signature Lightcone, Earthly Escapade. This is one of the better signature Lightcones in the game, just due to the vast amount of stats it actually provides. Starting off, it gives Sparkle 40 crit damage, which helps add onto her skill buff, being an additional 14 crit damage to your DPS. And then on top of this, its passive effect further strengthens this. The wearer of this Lightcone gains an effect called Mask at the beginning of the battle for 3 turns. While the wearer has Mask, the wearer's allies have their crit damage increased by 10% and crit damage increased by 24%. This is a Lightcone that gives almost 60 crit value worth of stats on its own, with no drawback or anything. This is pretty insane, and easily the best signature Lightcone in the game due to the vast amount of stats it gives. To a buff neutral character, her Lightcone is around a 20% DPS increase. This does go down when comparing her Lightcone to other strong options like Past and Future, but using this on Sparkle limits your team options, as you restrict yourself out of using her with characters that attack outside their turn. So Sparkle's Lightcone is a great pickup. I wouldn't say it's character defining, but it's an amazing resource to have, as the damage increase will most certainly justify its cost. Moving on to her other options, there's only a couple, so I don't think I need to go too in depth. The first is Past and Future. This Lightcone only really works if you play fast Sparkle. But if you do this, then this is easily her best Lightcone due to the insane raw amount of damage percent this provides to the buffed character. Like I said before, you will not have issues with activating the passive unless your Sparkle is either more than 2 times faster than your DPS or slower, which is unlikely. Additionally, all of this applies to Bronya's Lightcone too, but it's slightly better due to the SP that it provides every other ultimate. Her best option for damage outside of Past and Future is Carve the Moon. I don't think you understand how happy I am that this Lightcone I picked up in 1.0, because I thought Tingyun was hot, finally has a use case. The buffs may be random, but all 3 are pretty good, with even the energy having the potential to help forward an ultimate rotation for a character on your team. Sparkle's relic options are pretty simple. In most cases you want 4-piece Messenger, and if you can't get good sub stats on that, then 4-piece Musketeer or 2-piece Messenger with random pieces with good sub stats will suffice. Sparkle cares a lot more about sub stats than she does set bonus, as speed is the most important stat for her when playing her in a fast Sparkle team. Aiming to hit a speed breakpoint is generally better than trying to aim for really high crit damage. Her planars are fairly simple too. You pretty much just want Broken Keel. This is because it amps her own crit damage buff and ends up being the strongest out of the 3 offensive planars. Penacony is extremely good for quantum teams, and Fleet is fine if you have nothing else. For her main stats, you just want a crit damage body, speed boots and an energy recharge rope. Everything else doesn't particularly matter, and you can just choose the ones with better sub stats and you'll be golden. Sparkle's Eidolons are really strong, so strong to the point where in some cases pulling Sparkle Eidolons is actually more efficient than pulling DPS Eidolons. Sparkle's E1 extends the Cypher effect applied by her ultimate for 1 extra turn. Additionally, all allies affected by Cypher have their attack increased by 25%. Her E2 enables each talent stack to allow all allies to ignore 8% of the target's defense, totaling up to 24% defense ignore. If people thought Ruan Mei's 20% with 75% uptime was overpowered, then this is just the completely better version. Her E4 makes her ultimate recover 1 more skill point, and increases the talent's max skill cap points by 1. This is a pretty nice quality of life increase for Sparkle overall, helping her skill point generation even more. Her E6 firstly increases the crit damage boost effect of Sparkle's skill by 20% of Sparkle's crit damage, making her skill grant 56% of her crit damage total. Additionally, her skill's crit damage boost effect will apply to all allies currently with Cypher. Overall, Sparkle's Eidolons are great, providing a mix of damage increases and quality of life quite significantly. I know a lot of people will ask whether to pull her E1 or her Lightcone, and I think it's a pretty hard question to answer. Overall, her E1 most of the time is a bigger increase to Sparkle in teams where she can use past and future, but this restricts her team building quite a lot, as teams based around characters such as Jing Yuan cannot really benefit from past and future, meaning her Lightcone is generally a better pull for Sparkle. Usually most people would have a team building section here, but I am just going to tell you to pair either Tingyun or Ruan Mei with Sparkle, and this works for pretty much every team you would play Sparkle on. If you're wondering about Bronya, the characters that can use both together are quite limited, as the skill point economy isn't that great long term. Blade is one of the few characters where you can do this efficiently without any drawbacks at all, so he's the rare exception to this rule. Everyone else falls into one of these 2 categories. Overall, Sparkle is an extremely great buffer who is exceptional at what she does, which is having stupidly good buffing. She has the best buffs in the entire game without having a major skill point drawback like Bronya does. She's extremely versatile with her teams and Lightcone options, and is overall probably the best non-sustained character in the game. Thank you for watching. You should totally subscribe since this video took a really long time to make. But that's all from me. I'll see you guys in the next video.